He was known by many monikers, but it's the nickname a journalist gives him in her book that everyone now knows him as the Golden State Killer. One of the most prolific and notorious serial rapists and killers California has ever seen. Recently, I had a chat with the man in charge of prosecuting Joseph James DeAngelo, who is responsible for at least 13 murders and dozens of rapes. My name is M. William Phelps. I'm an investigative journalist and the true crime author of close to 50 books. I've dedicated the past 25 years of my life to helping families of the missing and murdered. Join me. We're crossing the line. In the spirit of Halloween coming up in a couple of days, I have a terrifying case for you this week, along with a very special guest. A ghost in California for decades, he was known as the original Nightstalker, the Vasilia Ransacker, and East Area Rapist. Most notably, late author and journalist Michelle McNamara deemed him the Golden State Killer. Back in 2011, before all the hype and popularity, I also interviewed several of the Golden State Killer's victims and many victims' family members for an episode of my old investigation discovery series, Dark Minds. How he went from becoming all those various names and a killer authorities believed at one point they would never catch, to Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, is a case spanning from the early 1970s all the way up until 2020, when DeAngelo pled guilty to 13 counts of murder. It is a case that took over the true crime community for a time, sending all of us into a frenzy of disbelief that this maniac had finally been caught. And the entire time, there he was, right under the noses of everyone, living his life in rural California in a suburban house. According to the man who was set with the arduous task of prosecuting DeAngelo, Thien Ho, Michelle McNamara's great book about the case, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, published in 2018, 2 years after her shocking and untimely death at the age of 46. That book was the first part of telling this story, with the investigation being the second, and now the third leg on that iconic true crime stool, The People versus the Golden State Killer. Thien's book about building a case against DeAngelo completes the trilogy of information focused on what I think was one of the biggest true crime stories from the past 25 years. Thien Ho is charming and intelligent and outspoken. He has this way of drawing you into what he is talking about and commanding your attention, which any good trial attorney learns to master. He was elected District Attorney of Sacramento County in 2022, just as the Golden State Killer case broke wide open. Prior to that, Thien served in executive management as the Sacramento County Assistant Chief Deputy DA over the Justice and Community Relations Bureau, which handles post-conviction litigation training, community prosecution, and media outreach. So the guy is well-rounded, well-schooled. He knows the court system as a prosecutor as good as anyone. His book is expertly paced and astutely written, giving us a lot of new information we would have never had without Thien opening up to talk about what is surely the pinnacle case of an incredible career.
So when you look at the evolution of the Golden State Killer. He starts as the Vasilia Ransacker, 1974 to 1975, when he's committing a series of 120 burglaries in the Vasilia area in a 3-mile square radius. From there, he moved and became a police officer in the Auburn Police Department, and that's when the East Area Rapist series started in Sacramento, and he became known as the East Area Rapist. He expanded his crime spree to the Bay Area in California, where he became the East Bay Rapist. After he got fired from being a police officer, he ended up really traversing up and down the state of California, and he started his rampage in Santa Barbara, where he killed 4 people, assaulted 2 other people, and then he killed Lyman and Charlene Smith in Ventura, and then he moved down to Orange County, where he killed 4 additional people. And he was known in Southern California as the original Nightstalker. And when Michelle McNamara wrote her famous book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, she gave him the moniker of the Golden State Killer because he was so prolific in terms of his geographical scope.
And so you're working as a prosecutor, and how long had you been a prosecutor at that time?
At that time, I've been a prosecutor for almost 20 years. I started as a prosecutor in 1998, and I worked in the Bay Area, in Santa Clara and Contra Costa County, where some of his crimes occurred. But I've been in Sacramento since 2004. I prosecuted sex crimes. I prosecuted gangs. I was in homicides at the time that I was learned about the case and was assigned to it.
Sometimes in life, the stars just align, and things work out in a way that seem to have been scripted by some sort of cosmic author. When we talk about the discovery and capture and prosecution of the Golden State Killer, it does make you believe there were bigger things at play here working in favor of justice. And Thien, he was ready for this case to come along. No doubt about it.
Well, over the years, I've prosecuted nearly 100 jury trials. And as a result of prosecuting nearly 100 jury trials, I've seen a lot of bad people, a lot of bad situations, and dealt with a lot of monsters that we see in society, the darkest recesses of the human spirit.
I get this question all the time myself, so I want to ask you, how do you compartmentalize? How do you close the office door at 5 and go home and eat dinner, play soccer, watch TV, and leave it at the office?
I really don't. I mean, we try to, but the fact of the matter, we can't just turn it on and off like a light switch. I dream about my cases. I dream about my victims. I don't stop thinking about whether I'm in the shower. I may be sitting at dinner with my family, but my mind is elsewhere. I'm at the soccer practice watching my daughters run around on the soccer field as I'm sitting in a lawn chair with an umbrella in the middle of, the summer heat, but my mind is elsewhere. And it's interesting, like in Great Britain and England in the old days, they used to have what they call the sin eaters. The sin eaters would be somebody that is hired and brought to a funeral. And what they do is they eat a piece of bread. And it's not necessary to absolve the sins of the person that died, but you're consuming it so they can go on peacefully. In the same way, I think prosecutors, I think detectives, I think people who are first responders, people in the military, people who work in the forensic field, we are the sin eaters. We take in all the sins of the world. And at some point, we have to find a way to basically expel it from our bodies because it's unhealthy, but you can't just turn it on.
It was interesting to me how Thien heard about the Golden State Killer case. It's a fascinating piece of true crime we don't usually get such an intimate glimpse into. The behind the scenes of a prosecutor and how a case not only evolves, but comes together.
So I was a young prosecutor handling my first homicide case. Rajneet Singh was a young lady that was found half naked behind a wall in Rancho Cordova on New Year's Day. The rain is drizzling down. There's DNA on her body. So I decided to go out to the crime scene as trial was approaching. And the detective on the case, Sergeant Jim Barnes of the homicide team of the Sheriff's Department, along with another homicide prosecutor in the office, Billy Satcher, we went out there. And Billy came along with me because he grew up in Section 8 housing in Rancho Cordova. So we're going to the crime scene. And I notice on Folsom Boulevard, there's all these businesses, all these homes and apartments. They have metal bars on the windows, on the doors. And I'm like, what's going on here? And the detective says, oh, that's because of the ear. I said, the ear? And he says, yeah, the ear. He was the East Area Rapist. He would break into people's home in the middle of the night, shine a flashlight on the couple, force the wife to tie up the husband, and then tie up the wife. He would eat their food, drink their beer, and then he would take the wife in another room, put a bed sheet on the husband, place plates and perfume bottles on his back, and say, if I hear anything drop, anything break, I'll cut your son's ear off and bring it to you. And then he'd sexually assault the wife, and he would leave, taking her wedding band, one earring, but leaving the other. And I'm like, did you ever catch him? He said, no. And my buddy Billy, who grew up, said he was the boogeyman of our childhood. And I said, you know what? If you guys ever catch him, that's the one case, the only case I'll ever ask for. So your question is, how did I hear about it? That's how I heard about it. Now, how I got the case is another story completely.
Tell me about that.
So it's April of 2018. There were protesters outside our building related to an officer-involved shooting. They were hanging effigies of the DA at the time, setting on fire a piñata, having kids hit it. People were blowing bullhorns into the office. In the midst of this, I'm on the homicide team, and I see the head of the homicide, Rod Norgard. Rod is there, and he's talking to our number two, Steve, and they're whispering to each other. They're huddled together. They're like walking back and forth, and there's this excitement in the air. So I look over to my secretary. What's going on over here? She said, oh, nothing. So later I see the two of them huddled together, and they walk into the supervisor's office, Rod's office, which is right next to mine. We share a wall, and these are really thin walls. If you put your ear up to the wall, you can hear what's being said. So I put my ear up to the wall, and I heard the words, 1 in 16 septillion match to the EAR. And in Sacramento County, when you hear the word EAR, it means one thing and one thing only, the East Area Rapist. So later that night, I went home. I'm checking the news. I'm trying to figure out what's happening. 4 o'clock in the morning, I wake up and there's an announcement. There's going to be a major breakthrough on the East Area Rapist. So they found him. They arrested him. He's a 72-year-old retired mechanic living in Citrus Heights. So a week goes by. They haven't assigned the case. So I decided, thinking back 6 years earlier, I go into Rod's office, the supervisor's office. I didn't say a word. I said, look, I said, Rod, if you're on SEAL Team 6 and they found Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, you know what you say? And he smiled and says, what? And I said, I want on that helicopter ride. And I pointed to the file. I want on this helicopter ride. An hour later, I was assigned as the lead prosecutor on the case.
Catching DeAngelo was close to a 50-year search. Beleaguered at times, silent at others, with generations of investigators and prosecutors going hard at catching a guy who had literally terrorized communities. The frustration and anger and terror of not knowing who this guy was and that he could strike at any time, slip inside any random household, something serial killers don't generally do, gave the entire case a ticking clock narrative, which became louder and louder inside everyone's head. I asked Thien to talk me through that journey and explain what it was like from an insider's point of view.
So you may recall, we had his DNA from the Contra Costa rapes. Now the problem was, rape in the 1970s, society and law enforcement didn't view it in the same way. It was only a 3-year statute of limitation. So when those 3 years were passed in Sacramento and many areas, they threw away the DNA evidence. They threw away the forensic evidence. So the only DNA was from the Contra Costa rapes, like 3 of them. And then there were the rapes, murders down in Ventura, Santa Barbara, Orange County. And so in 2001, they connected. So in 2001, they connected all of the Southern California murders with the rapes in Contra Costa. And so then what happened was they uploaded it to CODIS, right, to try to figure out and identify who he was. But in order to be in CODIS, the FBI national database of DNA profiles, you had to either A, have been arrested for certain crimes or convicted for certain crimes. DeAngelo never was. So it always came up blank. But in 2018, Paul Holes came up with an idea. He came up with an idea to use genetic genealogy to find DeAngelo. So he came to Sacramento, made a pitch here, And we set up a team to find him. So what they did was they wanted to use some of the crime scene evidence, okay, and send it and create what we call a SNP profile, single nucleotide polymorphism. It's the type of profile that is used on 23andMe, GEDmatch, because it measures a million different locations in the chromosome. And the more places that you have in common with somebody else, the more closely related you are. So the problem was we couldn't find DNA to use it. There were none left in Contra Costa. So there's a whole story about how Paul went to Orange County to try to get some of their DNA. And Orange County wouldn't give them their DNA. So we went to Ventura because the coroner in the Lyman and Charlene Smith had a practice of taking 2 rape kits. So one rape kit was consumed completely in Ventura. The other one sat in the back of a refrigerator at the coroner's office for 40 plus years. And a detective working for another rape kit on another case happened to notice that there was this rape kit that was sitting there in pristine condition. So Ventura County allowed us to use their DNA. We took that DNA, converted it to a SNP profile, uploaded to the genealogy database, and we found that he was related to somebody on that database, a distant cousin. So what we then did was we then said, all right, built the family tree. This distant cousin, do they have brothers and sisters? Who are their parents? Who are their grandparents? Who are their uncles and aunties? Who are their cousins? And we worked all the way back to the common ancestor and back down on that family tree. But now we had thousands of names on this family tree. So we had to collate and go through them and figure, okay, how many of them are male? How many of them are white? How many of them have blue eyes? How many of them lived in Sacramento, Ventura, Visalia, Santa Barbara? How many of them were cops? How many of them were military? And we narrowed it down to 3 people. DeAngelo was one of them. He was living in Citrus Heights. So we followed him around, took a sample from his car out of sight of a Hobby Lobby. There wasn't enough DNA. So we took a garbage truck, lined it with plastic, put a detective dressed in a garbage uniform of a garbage man, drove up to the house, took that garbage out that was put on the street, dumped it in. The last item we tested was a piece of tissue. And that piece of tissue was 1 in 16 September matched to the East Area Rapist and all of the murders and all of the rapes that we still had DNA.
You had him nailed. It was him. No doubt about it.
No doubt about it. Now, there were challenges, though, because remember, Sacramento and the Sacramento murders didn't have any more DNA left. So we had to prove the Sacramento murders and the Sacramento rapes by use of modus operandi.
When you figured out it was DeAngelo, did he fit the profile of the guy you thought he would be?
Absolutely. So the FBI had done several profiles of him. We believed that he was law enforcement, ex-military, right? And lo and behold, he was law enforcement, ex-military. We believed that he lived in the Rancho Cordova area. And in fact, that's where he grew up. He went to high school in Folsom. He rode his bike. He swam in the American River all along Rancho Cordova where he committed his crime scene. And if you ever visit Rancho Cordova, one of the things you notice is these concrete canals that intersect multiple streets. And so when he committed his crime, he would simply slip down into the canal, ride a bike below surface and cut across multiple streets and be gone in a matter of minutes, where it would take half an hour for the police to get from one side to the other.
Let's break here, come back, and hear Thien discuss some of what DeAngelo was like behind the scenes. New information you will find, as I did, quite fascinating. More Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps in 1 minute. First-hand, first-person accounts are the best sources of information when discussing a case such as the Golden State Killer, as there are countless rabbit holes you can go down if you begin to start searching the case via the old Google search engine. Here, we have the prosecutor who asked for the task of prosecuting the Golden State Killer. He wanted this case. I had to wonder, how does one distill such a big case with so many victims, literally running into the hundreds, down into a narrative that you can get a jury to understand cogently and digest easily? And not to forget, you need to do that knowing DeAngelo is going to pull out all the stops and do his best to either make himself look crazy or pull that old Harvey Weinstein trick of appearing unhealthy, very ill and elderly. Which never works, of course. But these guys, they will try it because everything needs to be about them. They need the focus on them, always. And of course, they will always try their best to disrupt the justice system any way they can. Thien explains this all very well in his book, which led me into wanting to understand the psychology of the Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo.
But the very first victim that I talked about, her name is Phyllis. And Phyllis was the very first sexual assault victim in Sacramento. She's been on TV, so that's why I'm saying her name. She overheard him after she had been assaulted in the other room, talking to himself, whispering, like as if he was talking to himself. And other victims and other people have heard that as well. And so DeAngelo engaged in this psychological warfare where he would oftentimes talk about how he lived down by the river in a van and he was just there for drugs. He would talk about how he was, doing this or that to just throw off investigators. Because as a cop, and he was committing a lot of his crimes while he was a police officer, he knew that the detectives would be looking for clues about his background. So he was throwing them off, making them look like maybe 2 people were involved or 3 people, making him look like he was a drug addict when in fact he wasn't a drug addict. So it's part of his manipulation because DeAngelo was a master manipulator. Even after we arrested him, even after we put him in jail, he was going into court acting as if he was an invalid in a wheelchair. But I have videos of him back in his cell doing exercises, jumping jacks, going up and down his bunk bed. He walked into a cell one time with a cane. The moment the door closed, he dropped his cane and was just walking just fine. I mean, he was the master manipulator.
What's driving him? What's motivating DeAngelo when he starts out doing this stuff? Where is it rooted?
How are monsters created, right? That's a question that we ask. Is it genetics? Or, is it in our genes or is it something that's in our environment, right? And I think sometimes it's a combination of both. So for DeAngelo, he experienced trauma as a child. When he was a child, he saw that his younger sister was raped by 2 service members on the military base overseas. He watched that, and when he came home, he told his parents did nothing about it. And so he witnessed trauma as a child, but I tell you that one of the victims, Gay Hardwick, she spoke at the sentencing and the impact statement, and she says, he talks about how he experienced trauma. We were sexually assaulted, we were raped, and did we turn out to be monsters and do this to other people? No, it's the choices you made. And so while he experienced this in his life, it was the choices he made. And so it started when he was a teenager, committing burglaries and abusing animals in Rancho Cordova. Then it escalated into peeping toms. It escalated into breaking into people's home where he felt as if the law didn't apply to him. And then when he became a police officer, he was emboldened because now the law in his mind really didn't apply to him because he had a badge. And then he committed his crimes in Visalia with impunity. And he knew the procedures of law enforcement. In fact, when I tell people this fact, they are blown away by it. The Vasilia Ransacker committed 120 burglaries in a 3 square mile radius in Vasilia from 1974 to 1975. The very last incident of the Ransacker series, he was almost caught by Officer Bill McGowan. And at one point, they were face to face. They saw each other's face before the Ransacker shot at Officer McGowan, almost killing him. And when detectives later asked Officer Bill McGowan, hey, you're the only officer to have ever seen the Ransacker's face. What did it look like? And Officer McGowan says, you know what? I can't put a name to that face, but he looks familiar. Well, what people later found out and what we found out was during this time frame of the ransacking series, Joseph DeAngelo was a police officer in the nearby town of Exeter. He was helping out on the task force to find the ransacker, and he was the ransacker. So once his face was seen, he moved up north. But it was just the evolution of a monster. And he committed his crimes in Sacramento, and then he got fired as a police officer. His life began to spiral out of control. And that's when he committed the murders and rapes down in Southern California. And in the beginning, he left behind the ligatures. But as the murders were happening, he took them with him.
A psychopath like DeAngelo knows no bounds, and he embodies a subject I talk about a lot on this show. How the psychopath's criminal behavior continues to escalate over a period of time and will never, ever, 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 ever de-escalate. Here, in DeAngelo's case, we see him beginning with burglary, graduate to rape, and then finally cap it off with serial murder. We saw this with Israel Keys as well. I could name many more. Gary Evans, a serial killer I wrote about in my book, Every Move You Make, exhibited the same behavior. It's all about that power and control, sure, but also the high they get, the excitement. Same as a junkie starts with a few bags of dope and winds up needing more and more as their addiction and use grows, so does that thrill for the serial killer. They need more out of each crime, each murder, to stimulate the demons. Keep them at bay. Keep them fed. When I looked at the original Nightstalker Golden State Killer case long ago, one of the more interesting aspects of his crime scenes were the knots he used to tie up many of his victims. He often left behind a diamond knot. It's also called the button knot and goes by several other names. In the Golden State Killer case, back when I was involved, the focus of the knot was on the military side, meaning profilers then thought the killer had to be in the military or at least a vet, with the Navy being the obvious go-to. Perhaps he was even a shipyard worker or involved in the nautical field on some level. The diamond knot is not easy to tie, trust me. I had directions how to do it in front of me while we filmed the show, and I just couldn't figure it out. So, to imagine a serial rapist and killer in the moment, in the situation, tying this knot to bind his victims and, at times, their husbands, he had to know what he was doing. But there are other uses for the knot which were not really looked at back in the early days of investigating the cases. I asked Thien about the knot and what they now know.
You know, there's a lot of debate about that in terms of the significance about it. And we examined it. In fact, what people don't realize, I had hired a knot tying expert. There's actually such a thing as a knot tying expert, right? And so I researched it, found the foremost expert, and we hired him. You know, we're talking about the diamond knot in Ventura. And I believe that it was actually a diamond knot from a drapery cord that was already pre-tied, rather than one that he actually tied. So there's different theories about it. What is important is a lot of times he would show up to the crime scenes with pre-tied shoelaces, right? And then he would make the quick cinching. And in fact, we found some pre-tied shoelaces at a number of the crime scenes. The rapes in, some of the rapes in Contra Costa, some of the rapes in Sacramento. And we found one right next to the murder scene of Brian and Katie Majori in Rancho. But I think really the diamond knot, there is a theory out there that he tied it, but there's another theory that it could have come from some drape. So that kind of explains, because it's more of a complicated knot, as you know.
If there is one psychological trait standing out to me with DeAngelo as compared to most serial killers, it's how much DeAngelo tried to and was often successful at keeping 2 steps ahead of the investigation, something that stimulated him immensely. Psychopaths, I say this all the time, thrive on stimulation. They need it constantly in order to survive. And by survive, I mean not crack. Think of it as nourishment for their personality disorders and psychopathy. For DeAngelo, same as Israel Keys, he took it all to another level.
Absolutely. You see the psychology in that, and he's learning every step of the way. And the reason why he used the fire alarm was because if you fire a gun, the neighbors are going to hear it, right? And so he quickly has to leave the scene, and escape. But if you're using a blunt force instrument like a log or a base of a large lamp, you're allowed to commit the crime and then still go on to do other things inside the house. So, for example, we believe he killed the husband first and then was there to continue his sexual assault and his depravity with the wife at that point.
I need to take one more break. When we come back, Thien will share some interesting side notes about the case you haven't heard before. Vignettes from his book I found to be remarkable and a great way to bring true crime fans into the real world of solving serial crime and what it actually entails. Stuff you won't get from a Netflix documentary or, let's just say, some cheesy podcast, where the hosts are, say, sitting on a couch, laughing, talking about investigations as if they've lived them. Yep, I took that shot. Be right back in 1 minute with more Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps. And don't forget, Paper Ghosts, Season 5, The Texas Teen Murders, begins next week. You can get the trailer in the feed of this show. I just want to say something here. My producer will point out that last comment I made right before the break. Ask me if I really want to take a jab at the competition. And my answer will be, hell yeah, I do. Why? Because there is far too much bullshit in the true crime podcasting space today and on social media. And honestly, I'm damn tired of it all. If you are not going to bring integrity and honesty and tell it like it is, shut your mouth. Go back to your life before you jumped on the bandwagon. But anyway, I digress. Back to Thien Ho, the lawyer who prosecuted the Golden State Killer. We often wonder how crime victims and their families manage to get from day to day, especially when the person who killed their loved one is sitting in a courtroom right there in front of them. In his book, Thien relays a story about DeAngelo's first rape victim that will not only answer that question, but put into perspective how agonizing and heart-wrenching all of this stuff can be for victims and victims' families, but also the victories they experience as well.
Part of the inspiration behind why I decided to write the book and why I'm passionate about it, the very first rape victim, as I mentioned, in Sacramento, is Phyllis. It wrecked her life. She could not be at home alone for long periods of time. She set up all sorts of alarm systems. Very early on, I met Phyllis when I got into the case and was assigned the case. And I'd read the sexual assault. Here was a 23-year-old woman. I'd seen the pictures. I'd read about her, the description. But here I am 40 years later in a courtroom shaking her hand. And she's got gray hair and glasses and the wrinkles on her face. And it was as if when I shook her hand that I was reaching across time and space. And she shook my hand and she says, "Hi, I'm Phyllis. I'm victim number one." And every time I came to court, there was Phyllis sitting in the front row. And I'd sit down and I'd talk to her. So, Phyllis, this is what's happening in court today. This is what I expect to happen next time. And we just chat a little bit, catch up since the last court appearance. When near the end of the case, I was told that, Phyllis had cancer and she could not be at the next court appearance. And so when we were in court, and as you know, there's a point in court where you have to give the allocution, meaning you go with the facts of that particular case. We did the allocution for Phyllis's case where she was going through chemo and she couldn't be in court. So when we went through the allocution for Phyllis, all the other victims and survivors stood up for her. Fast forward 2 months later, Phyllis is giving her impact statement. And I was looking forward to seeing Phyllis give her impact statement. She couldn't be there because her immune system was compromised and we're in the middle of COVID. The very next day, we're back in the makeshift courtroom at the Sacramento State Bar Room because we're in COVID. We have to be 6 feet apart, and the only place that could accommodate 200 plus people 6 feet apart was a Sacramento State ballroom that was massive. And so we made that into a makeshift courtroom. And I remember as DeAngelo was getting sentenced, I look across the courtroom and I see Phyllis sitting there. She had a mask on and her glasses. She had a twinkle in her eye. For the first time in 40 years, she obtained a measure of justice. 3 months later, Phyllis died from cancer. And so when I think about the case now, I don't think about DeAngelo or his crimes. I think about Phyllis and all the other survivors. You know, true crime is a great genre, but sometimes we focus a lot on the crime and the criminal. I wanted to move with this book to focus onto the law enforcement officers who never gave up the pursuit of justice, and on the survivors who transformed their tragedy into triumph, their pain into power. And so several of the other survivors started a nonprofit called Phyllis's Garden. So a portion of the proceeds of this book goes to Phyllis's Garden.
There was another ploy by DeAngelo that threw off early investigators. DeAngelo put a lot of time and effort into the crime scenes he left behind. He would make and eat sandwiches and drink beers from victims' refrigerators. He'd rearrange furniture and break and steal things. I asked Thien to explain why he did this, because if there's one behavior from a serial killer you can count on, it's that they do not do anything without a purpose. There is motive behind every decision they make.
One of the questions I always get, especially from the victims, because when he committed his crimes, he would take one earring and leave the other. He'd take a wedding band, he'd take coins, he takes all sorts of things from the house. So all the victims would ask, did you find any trophies in his house? You know, they did the initial search warrant, right? And we didn't find any trophies on the initial search. About a year into the case, and this has not been publicly spoken to before until this book. About a year into it, we received information from one of his former coworkers that DeAngelo had bragged about how before his house in Citrus Heights was built, before the foundation was laid, he created a secret compartment underneath the house. So now we're thinking, oh my goodness, that's where all the trophies are hidden. So immediately we got a search warrant, what we call them a piggyback search warrant, that piggybacks off the other one. We went to court, got it, and now we're back in the house. Now, what we wanted to do, in the house at that point was no longer occupied. The family was putting up for sale. So we had to use ground penetrating sonar. So I retained somebody to come in to do just this. I roll up to the house, the guy comes in, and we have all these detectives there. He takes this sonar device and he puts it, first of all, on a portal device, and he's scanning up and down every inch of the inside of the house. And then he goes out into the backyard, and it's almost like a lawnmower machine, and he's just rolling it up every inch of the backyard. But there's just one area, and we're all huddled around it. He keeps looking at it, he keeps going back multiple times, and he's there with a long ponytail, and he's doing it. And then he kind of takes some spray paint and he circles it. And then he takes out this metal, these two metal sticks, and he's moving around over there, and he's leaning down, and he's kind of just moving. It was like divining rods, right? And he keeps going back, and then he puts an X. And so I walk over to him, and all the detectives are there. And I said, hey, what's going on with that one spot over there? And without even looking at me, without skipping a beat, he says, there's a disturbance in the force. And I'm thinking, disturbance in what fucking force, right? And he explained it to me. He says, when you dig something up and you put dirt back in, it disturbs the composition. And he can sense that through the radar and through the divining rods. So they started digging and digging and digging. And you know what they found?
A bunker.
You have to buy the book to find out. At thienho.org, thienho.org.
They found a bunker. Little frustrating, I realize, but you have to give the guy props. He's trying to sell a book here. And trust me, getting people to buy and read books today is tougher than it's ever been. Still, I couldn't let Thien go without getting something revealing and exclusive out of him.
So what I will tell you here, without yet buying the book is we found some interesting reading materials in the house.
So was he into nasty type of dirty porn?
Well, when we talk about his depravity, what I would say is this. So he was 72 at the time that we caught him. He's currently 78 right now in prison. When he was at the Sacramento County Jail, and I would get videos of him in a cell, because what people don't realize is when we took him into the booking cell, after his interrogation, we put him in the booking cell, he put his head down and rammed it into a wall. So when you look at his booking photo from the jail, he has blood on the top of his head. It's red. So we were worried that he was going to kill himself. So they put him in a cell that had cameras in it, and I would get videos of him in his cell. And at the age of 72, he's standing in a cell looking at a young female who was delivering food to all the different cells, and he started to masturbate. And so when you're talking about DeAngelo, you're talking about his age, his sexual depravity, it didn't stop. Even though the last known murder was in 1986, it didn't just like a light switch turn off. You know, people ask me all this time, and, you know, I mean, do you think, why did he stop? Why did he stop in 1986 with the murder and rape of Janelle Cruz? Why did he stop? And every time somebody asked me that question, I leaned in and I said, what makes you think he stopped? You know, at one point he was living in Southern California. You know, when we found him, we recreated and retraced every single step of his life from the moment he was born in Bath, New York, to the moment that we arrested him. But there was a period of time when he was in Southern California where his whereabouts and what he was doing exactly was very difficult for us to pin down. And if you think about it, you commit these murders, and he's evolving now as a serial killer. He's killing his victims. He's taking the ligatures. I mean, what's to say he's not killing somebody and then dumping their body in the Angeles National Forest, and we just never found him? Personally, I don't think he stopped. I don't think he stopped.
The Golden State Killer was always motivated by sexual depravity. We all know that. But to hear Thien place it all into what is an easy-to-understand narrative of a guy in his mid-70s still fixated on what motivated him 50 years before is astonishing, and shows you just how deep-seated and fundamental the psychopathy is in the minds of serial criminals. Once they become who they are and begin acting it out in the real world, taking it from the fantasy stage into reality, there's no turning back. I had one last question for Thien. So talk to me about the haunting weight of unanswered questions. How's that feel for you, Thien?
You know, what I would say is this is, why do we do what we do? Why did law enforcement never give up on this case, even after some detectives retired and left the force? And every generation of officer that came in, they would pick up the torch from the previous generation and continue to look and search and find it. There were so many unanswered questions. Who was the monster behind the mask? Who was the boogeyman of our nightmares? And for the victims and for the survivors, the unanswered question. For example, Chris, who was one of the victims in Sacramento, she kept torturing herself over the years. Do I know him? Did I babysit for his family? Do I see him? You know, was he watching me at the local grocery store? And when she saw him in court for the first time, she realized that she didn't know him. And it was a sense of relief for her. It was a burden as if it was lifted off his shoulders. But for every question that is answered, there are other questions that remain unanswered. You know, why did he choose these people, right? Why did he pick this person versus that person? We know that he was very meticulous. He was a hunter of humans. He was preying upon human beings rather than hunting deer or elk. He was hunting human beings. And he would break into homes and leave something in the seat cushion and break back in to see if they found him. He would take like a small item to see if the family would notice it. He was toying with people. And even when he was committing his crimes and in there, he would sit there in silence and watch them. And the moment they thought he was gone, he would say, no, I'm still here. And even the act of taking one earring and leaving the other behind as a reminder of what was taken and what was lost, he wanted to play God. That was his psychology. And there are questions that we'll never be able to fully answer about his motivations. I think it really came down to the idea that he felt very powerless physically and in his own life. And this was his way of exerting that power and that omnipotent essence of God over other people and to destroy people and hold them in the palm of his hand. It's pure evil.
I think ending this on those words, pure evil, sums it up in a more divine way. But the fact is, Joseph DeAngelo, the original Nightstalker, Golden State Killer, whatever the hell you want to call him, was caught. A serial murderer who many believed, me included, never would be. So, there is justice here. Thien's book will be available wherever you buy your books on November 11th, 2025. It's a wonderful addition to the understanding of this case, a much-needed one at that. That'll do it for this week. Be safe. Be aware. Please subscribe to Crossing the Line wherever you get your podcast. And don't forget, leave a review of the show, especially on Apple Podcasts, and log on to crossingtheline.biz or mwilliamphelps.com to contact me and suggest cases, or just say hi. And look for me across all social media platforms using the @ symbol and my name, M. William Phelps. Thank you for supporting this show. I am allowed to do it because of you, and that truly means more to me than I can say. Crossing the Line is executive produced by M. William Phelps, LLC, and Matthew Valentinus, Mom's Basement Management. Written by me, M. William Phelps. Audio mastering and mixing by Matt Russell. Music by Epidemic Sound. Original music written and performed by Thomas Mooney, Tom Phelps, and Matt Russell.